the attack surface is being extended, not just within the confines of the network at the office anymore, but potentially thousands of different points.
Welcome to the RANE Insights podcast series. I'm Emily Donahue. Let's talk about artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. For many people, the phrase prompts an unconscious recoil or thoughts of dystopian futures run by autonomous robots, like those you see in movies and books. The reality is, right now, AI is confined to machines programmed to learn and mimic the actions of humans. AI can be used to bolster cybersecurity and predict cyber risks in a number of ways. In this podcast, RANE cyber analyst Ali Pluchinski interviews Dave Reske, CEO at Guardian Digital. They talk about how his company uses AI to address ransomware.
Dave, thank you very much for joining me today. To start off the interview, I wanted to ask you about different kinds of cyber crime. There were 623.3 million ransomware attacks claimed globally this past year, representing a rampant increase in the United States alone. The FBI reported nearly $2.4 billion in financial loss to business email compromise, or BEC scams, in 2021, which is 49 times as much as the losses from ransomware. So my question to you was, when is this proliferation of cybercrime going to end? How big will this threat get, and what is going to stop it?
Yeah, great question. Ransomware is the most serious threat that businesses face today. Cybersecurity threat or otherwise, it accounts for huge amounts of losses, and small businesses are bearing the brunt of these attacks. And they haven't really shown any sign of slowing down, thanks in part to many businesses falling short with their cybersecurity strategies. They're just not prepared. I think as long as these vulnerabilities exist and there's a lack of the safety measures in place, the attacks will go on, resulting in this increasing, financial loss. I also know that 60% of businesses that fall victim to ransomware attacks go out of business within 6 months. It's just not sustainable. I think we also need to see some better involvement from the government to do more with Bitcoin and the currency that's being used to pay these cyber criminals, making it untraceable and giving them carte blanche to extort these businesses. So it's a really serious risk.
Pertaining to that question, Dave, 50% of global chief information security officers, or CISOs, feel that their organization is unprepared for a cyber attack, and 56% of these CISOs consider human error to be one of the biggest cyber vulnerabilities to their operations. How do you think moving forward CISOs can find ways to bring in a new generation of professionals that will be able to handle these kinds of demands and threats?
Yeah, very, very true. An ongoing issue for CISOs is that, especially in smaller organizations, is a lack of funding and more sophisticated threats than the small teams can keep up with. And these shortage of skilled talents are really the leading barriers to battling cybercrime today. More people are working from home, meaning the attack surface is being extended, not just within the confines of the network at the office anymore, but to potentially thousands of different points, each of which have their own security policy and their own way of their own protection, individual protection. So it makes it increasingly challenging as everyone's rushing to the cloud and this whole work from home new business model. So I think the best way to bring in new talent is going to be to really educate people, evangelize cybersecurity, maybe partner with schools, build an internship program surrounding cybersecurity, and even promote open source as a solution. Developers and technical people can get involved in learning how the code works, teaching themselves, getting involved in one of the extensive open source communities. Whether it's cybersecurity related or not, maybe you pick up a an aspect of open source or software development that you enjoy, and identify potential security vulnerabilities. It doesn't necessarily have to be from a coding perspective, but maybe just an end user perspective. There's also documentation. A lot of open source is writing documentation and understanding how applications are supposed to work and documenting that. I think maybe another aspect would be security automation. Trying to do more, say with artificial intelligence, to really automate some of the more laborious or monotonous processes that we do, every day, like say, reading through, security logs, identifying anomalies, looking for, training the artificial intelligence to look for patterns that could potentially be an indicator of compromise. Trying to remove the human factor from, a lot of this, cybersecurity, methods, I think is also going to be another important part to really make better use of the resources that we have.
Dave, you've spoken before about the importance of interceding with a cybersecurity threat prior to it reaching an endpoint or an endpoint user. I was wondering if you could explain this importance in a little more detail and potentially talk about how your company attempts to mitigate cyber threats by interceding prior to these threats interacting with an endpoint user.
Yeah, endpoint should be the last line of defense. The best protection is that which stops the threats prior to it being received by the end user. By that point, we firmly believe that it's really too late. Endpoint security applications get involved once the user has already received the malicious email or the malware, and really has possibly already disclosed the sensitive information or credentials, or even downloaded the ransomware. So now, you're in more of a reactive approach rather than, a preventative, proactive. Endpoint security is really retrospective. The attack has already reached you. You just have to hope that you can catch it prior to, it being exploited. Endpoint protection leaves critical gaps in corporate networks and, leave cloud-based services and sensitive data susceptible to attack. So once a single, desktop is compromised, the attack can make its way throughout the organization. It also has this one-size-fits-all approach to it, where it's protecting users, from the cloud, provides a more tailored and specific type of defense.
Dave, your company works a lot with open source code and technology, and I was wondering if you might be able to explain the importance of open source code, why it might be advantageous compared to proprietary code, and also what kind of vulnerabilities can exist in open source code.
Yeah, absolutely. We're firm believers in open source as being a superior vehicle to delivering, cybersecurity solutions, and have been doing that since 1999. When I was at UPS, we were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on proprietary technology to solve many of the threats that they were facing at the time. At the time when open source was in its infancy, I was involved in the development of many of the methods and techniques that were used at the time to leverage the power of open source and that collaborative environment to develop email security and cybersecurity solutions for businesses for a fraction of the cost, and that were far more effective. They were quicker to deploy. They were more, obviously more collaborative, and leveraging resources from beyond just the limits of any particular organization. Even some of the largest organizations at the time did not have the resources that of the open source community. We really believe that open source is where innovation is happening today, and particularly in cybersecurity. Cybersecurity professionals are increasingly understanding the importance of open source and using it to protect customers to stay ahead of those cyber threats. Adopting open source reduces the overall cost of development, but it also provides additional features. It means that enterprises will have other options and they won't have to continue relying on a single vendor. Open source will lead to more secure open source code, since contributors can review the base code, make improvements, and share that technology among their peers and other businesses to as a stepping stone or a framework to continue to build on that protection. That crowdsourcing aspect of open source that I think most of our listeners are probably aware of, where everyone can contribute to a project and then make those changes available to everyone else to benefit from, means thousands of users and developers around the world can contribute to that, intelligence about a particular cyber threat or a particular, problem, whether it be ransomware or phishing attacks. Or a particular algorithm that's used to, solve a cybersecurity problem, or even improve a user interface. Ultimately, the code is exposed for everyone to review and monitor and audit and learn from and improve, so everyone benefits.
To that point, Dave, you mentioned AI earlier and algorithmic development overall. When we talk about open source code development and the way in which it drives AI or machine learning algorithmic development, is this the same point of crowdsourced collaboration that really drives the best AI development that then will really drive the future of cybersecurity?
Sure. Using AI and machine learning for cybersecurity is a relatively new idea, for cybersecurity. And it's a break from the typical antivirus solutions too, that are just signature based or pattern based, where if a certain pattern exists within an executable that matches something that was previously found, then they can identify it as a potential threat and stop it. Instead we're seeing machine learning that's like an immune system basically for organizations, rather than building an armor that's has to be constantly updated and scanning every single file for infections. I think that is a more antiquated technology these days, and the more adaptive and machine-based learning is really where the industry is headed. With these AI capabilities, we don't have to rely on human resources to evaluate all the potential security incidents. They can identify if a file has been compromised, for example, by ransomware, if it would be, of course, and then have prevented it from staying on the system long before there was ever a possibility of it executing. We're using it to detect anomalies in email security as well. Based on the billions of email messages that we've received, we've learned how to identify messages, say, an HR professional might normally receive, for example, compared with a phishing attack that purports to be from a trusted employee or executive. And it's not just the content or the natural language, but also the metadata within the email, as well as reputation that's learned from those billions of messages. And thinking about this, I'm just thankful that the ransomware gangs themselves haven't figured out how to use AI to deploy their malware. But I suspect that those days are coming. We believe they're developing their own zero-day attacks, and soon we expect that they'll be using AI to automate the sending of these malware campaigns.
Dave, one question I had for you in regards to vulnerabilities and zero-day exploitations. A lot of cybersecurity professionals claim that open source code is preferable because when a zero-day vulnerability is found or published, it can be dealt with a lot faster due to the collaborative nature of open source code compared to proprietary code. Have you found this to be true in your business operations, or do you think that there's something to be said about proprietary code maybe being able to invest more private resources into ameliorating any vulnerabilities in their code?
Yes, certainly open source has vulnerabilities. We've seen that with the highly publicized Log4j vulnerability, and I'm recalling OpenSSL from many years ago. Open source is pervasive. Every business uses it in some form or another. But today, business demands are driving faster software development and release cycles. Really, open source allows developers to have access to much larger sources of data and information. So, open source isn't going anywhere. Open source helps control costs and increases the quality of the development because many people can review the code. Security vulnerabilities are typically found and fixed more rapidly, despite a few outliers like we've seen with Log4j and OpenSSL. It puts control back into the user. At least with the vulnerabilities that we have seen, they're found and fixed much more rapidly, typically, And open source has the potential to be much more securely developed. We're also seeing large efforts from organizations around the world putting resources into auditing existing code, because open source does form the framework of the internet. Everything that from Facebook and Google and Amazon and Linux, of course, forms the foundation of the technology on the internet today. So businesses are putting resources into better securing it. As I said, open source really has the potential to be more secure, and I believe is generally more secure than the proprietary alternatives that rely on the organization responsible for that code telling you that there's a vulnerability and potentially leaving you at risk otherwise.
Thank you very much for that answer, Dave. The final question that I wanted to ask you today pertains more to what cyber users can do outside of either artificial intelligence or automated cybersecurity mechanisms to bolster their own cybersecurity. So, in other words, what cyber hygiene practices or individual responsibilities can cyber users do to maximize their own security when interacting in the digital world, and also to best bolster the security of their company while going about their daily cyber activities?
Yeah, great question. Human error is responsible for the vast majority of cyber attacks. So education is going to continue to be an important area. Cybersecurity training, awareness, constant education, and being involved in cybersecurity, developing policies around cybersecurity, and a plan for when an event occurs that needs to be mitigated. Practically speaking, I think people should be wary of potentially malicious URLs. Maybe hover over that link right before you click it. Another way that businesses can really protect themselves is to not rely on Microsoft 365. The default level of protection that they provide is sorely lacking. Microsoft is great at email, but not so great at email security. A large percentage of the attacks occur on that platform and other cloud email providers. And one successful attack could work across many thousands of different businesses. So it makes it quite easy and a great target for these cyber criminals to really perfect their attack methods. Protect against spoofing and sender fraud using email protocols like SPF and DKIM. We're finding that many of our clients haven't implemented those simple protection measures against spoofing, where an email can be sent purporting to be someone within their organization, benefit from that trust relationship, and it could easily be stopped with implementing some of these more technical protocols from the experts. Regular backups, of course, that's another one. Also, testing your restore. Make sure that your restore isn't backing up potential ransomware or some type of malware that when you do have an incident, then you're restoring that same potential malware to be attacked again. Use business email just for business email purposes. Keep the pictures of your friends and conversations about vacation plans or family events and more personal things to your personal email. Just reduce the potential attack surface and really focus on keeping your business protected. And finally, I think one key piece of this is to connect and partner with an organization that's really going to become an extension of your IT team and protect you from email security threats, which is really where better than 90% of attacks are happening today. With all of us being short-staffed, trying to manage complicated email security policies and support requirements is really daunting. Partnering with a company, perhaps Guardian Digital, will give you the ability to focus on your core competencies and leave email security, education, and protection and management to our experts instead.
Thank you very much for your time today, Dave.
Great. Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Dave Reske is the CEO at Guardian Digital, which makes email safe for businesses by helping companies stay ahead of emerging threats, make informed cybersecurity business decisions, reduce management complexity, and and free up IT resources. RANE is a risk intelligence company that provides access to critical insights, analysis, and support to ensure business continuity and resiliency for our members. Learn more about RANE's market-leading risk intelligence products at ranenetwork.com. That's RANE network.com. I'm Emily Donahue. Thank you for listening.